Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay. I wanted to make sure that this was recording so that we would have it that I could post to YouTube after it's over with. Um, and let me just, before we get started, I will post a uh, purchase link into the comment section so that
Thank you.
people can have a place to go to buy the book. So there we go.
It's good.
Um, let's see, it's 7 o'clock, so I'll go ahead and make this an official start to things. Allison Cundiff is here. Thank you so much, Allison, for visiting with me this evening.
Well, thanks for the invite. It's a pleasure to be chatting with someone about shared content. I know it's an area of expertise for you, so I've been excited.
Yeah, that's great. Um, let me just uh, tell everyone as I'm starting, I can't for some reason get my camera to work, so I really am here, although all you're seeing is a still photo of me. Oh,
We believe you.
I, I, I'm not like Hal in 2001, where I'm just a blinking red eye or something like that.
Well, you're smiling in your photo. It's a nice one.
Allison is the author of The Mysterious Women of J Road, which there's a link there in the chat section, and I'll post that also in the comments section afterwards. Um, which I referred to in a comment as a supernatural thriller, but you may disagree with that. It's a hard book to categorize, honestly. Can you tell us a little bit about this new novel?
Sure, I like your description of it because there are elements that are definitely supernatural, but it's for sure multi-genre. There is, it's folklore heavy. It's set in the Missouri Ozarks around the 42nd mile marker where I spent a lot of my time growing up. So there's a big nod to Ozark culture, which I'm very fond of. But then there's a little bit of romance, there's a little bit of history, there's the folklore lends itself to, I think, a lot of mystery, and that mystery, as detailed by Vance Randolph, can steep into the supernatural. So after so many years of living there, visiting there, and then researching it, I decided to just dive into that thriller supernatural component. And all of those elements sort of came together in the story. And so definitely I don't know, a kind of I wouldn't say a melting pot. I think I'd more say like a salad of genre components that are in there.
It's a salad. That's what I would serve as a good choice for you. Now, just for clarification, and for those who might not be familiar with the term, when you say the 42nd mile marker, what does that mean?
So in measuring location and distance in that part of Missouri, many people use the mile markers on Lake Ozark. So it is the more rural part of Camdenton, which is Camden County. So most people are familiar with the Ozarks through Tantera, and I guess it's called like Margaritaville. I'm not sure what they even call it. I've been
Mhm.
there very few times actually because my family's property is far more remote, but we are about 40 miles away from that by water. And so it is J Road is pretty far. I guess it's about 30 minutes from our property on Highway 7, and it's not water based. So where exactly that would be, I'm not sure. 7 and J, maybe around like 7.5. So yeah, measuring things by location on the lake is commonly how people, determine location.
Right. It's kind of a shorthand for how far back from the dam you are. So
Exactly.
42 miles is pretty far back. So it's way
Mhm.
out of the kind of commercial zone of the lake, and that kind of thing.
Right.
Um, what you I don't want to get too far into it too early, but one of the things that I like about the book is its main character, um, Lillian. Where did you come up with her, and what sort of inspiration did you have for that character?
I'm so glad that you liked her. I like her too. She's kind of like, I think she's kind of a shadowy component of myself. You know, we look back at our lives and we're like, oh, I wish I would have done that more courageously, or I wish I would have handled that a certain way. And I think she's sort of a superhero in the sense that she is. Like a young girl living rurally. Well, I say young girl, she's in her 20s, early 20s, but she's really courageous. And I think that there were parts of my own life where I looked back and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have handled this more courageously or that. And I think she kind of grew from that. But I wrote the book with the sort of sense of place of where I grew up, like really rooted in my mind. And I could see my family's property and the timber, and probably more specifically, J Road, which is what my father used to call it. It's Highway J. And I think I saw, like myself in my memories and kind of how we lived far away from, well, we did have phone, like, and I'm thinking of like the 1980s growing up there, but it was one of those shared lines. Like, I guess they called it a party line. Do you remember those? Like, where you'd be all of the neighborhood inhabitants, everybody sharing a line. So I'd pick the phone up to call my aunt down the street, and I'd hear like there would be other people on the line having a conversation. So like I think she sort of grew from my memories of the place and sort of my memories of myself. And then in part, I think I have always my part of my professional research has been rural Missouri, and how in a way there has been how it's characterized women in media, and also just my memories of women as our neighbors or in our community. And she sort of was a fictional representation of a lot of different samplings I took from that region. But yeah, I like her too. She's fearless, as many of us are when we're in our 20s, right? Like we're not afraid of anything. And she's pretty brave in the novel.
Well, and she comes across as kind of simple, and I think it would be um, not incorrect to describe her as having a lot of simplicity to her in her nature. But she's not simple in the sort of derogatory sense of things. She's somebody who um, I guess would be I'd say she sees things very uh, clearly, and in a way that more um, worldly people fail to see, because she kind
Hmm.
of direct and uh,
Mhm.
more in tune with things, I guess would be how I would describe it.
Yeah,
Um,
I read an article once about why cooking was so much easier for like our grandparents and great grandparents. They didn't have internet recipes and 1,000 cooking elements. They just had their staples, right? Like they had their flour, their sugar, their butter, their cast iron, and these recipes that they knew, I know, that were tried and true. And so when they like before dinner, they would have everything in their mind, like, yeah, this is the way things are. I'm going to go cook that dish. There were no distractions. And I guess she's sort of the characterization of the place and time when there was that architecture. And she's
mhm.
not muddled by like having a phone or having interaction in society. So she doesn't have that sort of need for external validation. She has her faith, she has her husband, she has her
Mhm.
convictions. And I think those guardrails keep her, like you said, not simple in cognitive capacity, but just like she knows what she values and she acts on it. So those
Yeah.
guardrails, I think, are very common for people in central and southern Missouri from my observation. Like I loved seeing that, and I loved that architecture, that small town architecture, which I haven't really seen correctly represented in like I haven't totally watched the series Ozark. I watched like the first three episodes of the first season, and I found it. There were a few elements I found to be correct, um, but I much preferred like other local writers like
Mhm.
Winterstone I found was far more correct, and so not the Hollywood adaptation. I liked the sort of regional inhabitants characterization of the space much better.
Yeah, definitely. I made it through all two or three, however many seasons of Ozark there were, and
Did you like
I
it?
think that's very true. It would bounce into something, and then it would bounce right back off of it again. So, it
Hmm.
was kind of a mix of stereotype and uh, moments of realism.
The part that I found most realistic, and again, I only watched a couple episodes, was
Mhm.
like, so the family moves there, and one of the locals asks about the septic or asks about the girl, flushing. And I remember being horrified, like bringing a friend down to our cabin. And, if you go into somebody's house, that was a common question, like, hey, please be careful what you flush. Our septic's pretty vulnerable, and I was like, oh my God, one of the writers must have visited to know that that would have been a colloquialism or something that everybody heard in very rural parts, and well water. I was like, oh, that's correct. But yeah, hair and makeup had no understanding of what we looked like
Yeah.
in those regions. I'm like, who's in charge?
My brother and I still have very distinct memories of the year when the well ran dry, because
Oh
there was a drought
no.
year one year, and
Yeah,
it was
was that
just
around
him. He was like,
1982?
yeah, I can't remember it, but we were just thrown back. It's when you're really thrown back into your basics, and that every use of water that you make, somebody has had to go get it, from town, and so you become like really parsimonious with your water use. And think, do I really need to, you know, drink this glass of water or that kind of
Oh, how
thing?
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, for sure. That's that's it's a precious resource.
no kidding. Well, would you mind sharing a bit of the Mysterious Women of J Road with us and maybe reading a
Sure.
passage for us?
Absolutely. Thanks so much. I just got my copies. It's really exciting. I think the publisher, April Gloaming, did a really good job with the cover and with their editing. They were a wonderful press to work with. And they focus almost exclusively on Southern literature or Southern themed literature. And so I would definitely recommend people check out their website, and their whole lineup of texts is just, I mean, it's just wonderful authors. So um, this chapter is 22. And so, like, essentially, what begins in the book is Lillian, who we were talking about. She's recently married and just had a baby, and she's pretty adoring of Jess, her husband. And she really kind of just wants to sleep and kind of rest after the delivery of her baby. And so she kind of shoos her husband, like, go hunting with your friends because it's like frog season and she knows he loves it. But she tells him, please don't go across Lick Creek, which is a fictional creek. And of course, as we know, because it's a thriller, her husband does cross Lick. And in this territory that he and his friends cross, there is sort of an ancient antagonist that is awakened as a consequence of stepping on protected land. And it unearths all of this conflict for not only her and her husband, but also the community at large. And so he comes home from hunting, and she can tell immediately because she is part of sort of a healer community, and they're called grannies. And if you're familiar with Vance Randolph's book, he gets into that. And there's a lot of other interesting research, scholarly research on the role of the Yarb doctor and the granny women and their sort of role in like folk history, especially in our region. And so in the beginning, in the first 100 pages or so, you meet these guys. They're really likable. You meet Lily and some of the neighbors. She's really close with one of the children who lives nearby. He is born with a learning disability, and he's sort of intuitive. He's one of the heroes of the book. That's Eugene. And so there's a break about 100 pages in where you get the backstory. And so I thought I'd read a couple pages if that works for you, Steve.
Sounds great. Sounds perfect.
Okay. My name is Lillian Black. I am the granddaughter of Celeste Black, an Ozark granny woman whose people settled in these parts even before we were free from the English. If you are not from these parts, then you should know that granny women are medicine women who assist in all sorts of healing in Ozark lands. You may have heard about how granny women are sometimes feared by city folk, that they dabble in dark magic. But my grandmother, Celeste, was no practitioner of witchcraft. She was a woman of the light. Celeste was the Lick's common granny until her death 1 year ago. I, her only surviving kid, am her sole apprentice. My studies are in midwifery. Our people's homestead has always been the land north of the Lick Creek in Camden County, Missouri. Our hamlet can be found in the central hills of the Ozarks near Niangua off Highway J, commonly known as J Road by the locals. Our ancestors were Scotch Irish yeoman farmers from the west of Europe, known for their horses and their hunting dogs. They traveled through rough weather to the Middle West after landing in this country, first settling in St. Genevieve, finding the city too modern, their ways too European. So they took off farther west, settling in the quiet hills of central Missouri almost 50 years before Missouri was even made a proper state. In their village, they first made camp and provided it with their name, Seal Bedad Dog. According to Celeste Library, translated from the Scottish, that means keeper of the black dog. Besides the camp, they opened a church, carved an altar, planted seeds from trade, found wives, and then produced children, one each. Their children continued their traditions and then their grandchildren. However, no offspring of the brothers ever produced more than one child. Some called that a gift, some a curse, but it's been hundreds of years and nothing's changed. My grandmother kept a series of journals, mostly medical. I learned at her knee most of my life, but have had to consult these repeatedly since she passed. After she was buried, I sold off most everything but the timber. A few household items, like her old gramophone and hope chest, and these journals were all I kept. These are the most valuable. They contain nearly 80 years of her medical notes. However, the cabin where I grew up still stands, empty on our land. After Jess and I married, he moved me and Celeste's hope chest into our cabin, and I've been going through these journals slowly. I must admit, as her tight script isn't quite what I'm used to. The obstetrics chapters, though, have been my focus, and in one section, the noted prevalence of the Rh negative constitution as the cause of the one child syndrome in the family is present. Celeste wrote there was no tincture for this condition. She herself had only the one child, my mother, and my mother only had me. So the family line of those two brothers is now settled with me, or with Glory, my daughter, I suppose. Celeste once told me I would have several children of my own, but I can't imagine how. Celeste presided over 6,000 healings before her death at the unnaturally old age of 109. Many people didn't believe her age, but I had seen her birth certificate dated in 1915 and containing the embossed seal of Camden County. The day I arrived at her cabin to collect her personals, I found it in the box below her bed, stored with some old photographs. There was some jewelry, some notes in another's long hand, and a coil of yellowish hair tied in faded ribbon, and a black and white photograph of Celeste and the man who had once been her husband. Celeste had been tall and willow thin with a bolt of white blonde hair behind her. The man stood right around her height, was slight boned and dark featured. He had a serious face, feline looking. They had matching Mozart kite. The man wore on his ring finger, Celeste wore hers on a necklace, which I now wear in her memory. Celeste had been married just the one time, but the marriage did not last and he moved north. She never spoke of him to me. Lots of people had theories about that, but they were all that stories. Women on their own always have it the hardest. So in this chapter, it then continues kind of going on a little bit about getting married, leaving her grandmother, and then kind of how J Road felt haunted to her. There was, again, like I said, across the lick, the land, the Southerners that they didn't interact with, and she could always sort of feel them across the creek, and she never crossed. But when her husband does, years later, it unearths a whole set of conflicts. And that's when there's the huge fight, and the Ozark Howlers, which is the supernatural creature, comes into play. And she has to sort of rely on her grandmother's journals and her own sort of healer energy and strength to get through the conflict.
Wonderful choice of passage there because even though it comes late in the book, it really sets things up for us as listeners and readers because now we kind of know what the story is heading toward or what what the essential elements of the story are. So thank you
Oh,
for
great.
choosing that. That was a great passage.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
you're welcome. I was going to ask you more about the folklore aspect of it
Mhm.
because a lot of folklore does, it has roots in actuality, um, but it also blends into the supernatural or the spooky, I guess, if you wanted to call
Mhm.
it that. What and you've mentioned Vance Randolph. What what's your relation to folklore and how did you sort of what kind of balance did you try to strike in terms of your use of it in the novel?
Oh, I love that question. I'm a teacher. I teach full-time high school English and part-time college English. And so much of it is looking at other people's creation myths and seeking to understand. There's the whole like, well, why are we here? But then there's a trickle down attempt to understand, well, what is our purpose while we're here, or what people were in our space before us. And I've been really interested in how rural regions have asked that of us. And the writing and the research into the Ozarks in particular, since I feel like I grew up with one foot here and one foot there, has been something that's been fascinating to me. So a lot of my research has been scholarly. So you'll see sort of outsiders coming into regions and picking around. But then I guess about 5 years ago, I started looking for people living in the Ozarks writing about their experiences in the Ozarks, because I think that's the sort of freshest approach to a region or an identity is coming up in a place and speaking to people who aren't in the place about that place. And so I tried to find as many writers as possible, reach out to them about this project, but also read their interpretation. And that includes your book, which I appreciate. You sending to me. I loved that. I will have to talk more about that another time. But Vance Randolph's approach to me seemed, I mean, it's dated, right? It's from 100 years ago. But what I loved about it is he approaches it sociologically, almost like an archaeologist. It reminds me of the way my college classes would discuss the respect or the reverence that certain scholars have when they enter a region and they interview inhabitants and they seek to understand. He writes like a journalist, so he presents it to us without absent there's no judgment. And so I found I think I liked his approach, his sensitivity to the region, and his care of the people, especially the people of marginalized communities, so people of color, indigenous peoples, women. There was respect, which I think was, for me as a woman in the 21st century, I found that to be a warm welcome into his style as a writer. And so I think I decided to uh, pull parts of that folklore into a potential project because I found the inhabitants of the Ozarks to be such warm writers and have such a care of the people. But yeah, Randolph's was one of my favorite texts. I've read that book several times. And it is broken into fascinating genres. Like, for example, the chapters on childbirthing, I think we've kind of come full circle. Like historically, putting women in a hospital or having them lie on their back during birth or all of those things. A lot of women I know who are having their children are addressing their options now and considering other options for childbirth. I'm like, oh, it's interesting. Rural communities have been exploring this for thousands of years. So I think that some of his ideas in the book are kind of coming full circle.
Yeah.
Um, so that was fun. That was fun to see too. But yeah, there's a lot of scholarly stuff. Oh, and you're going to hear my hunting dog. She's down there. She likes to be in the room when anything relating to this book comes up. Dogs feature very prominently in this book. But
Yeah.
yeah, I
Well,
think the research is there's so much good research out there on rural parts of Missouri.
great. You and to follow up on something that was in the passage, Celeste is a healer, and the colloquial term there is a granny. And grannies really feature very powerfully in rural folklore in general, but certainly in Ozarks folklore
Mhm.
specifically. I really like uh, the prominence that she plays in the book. Um, is you've have you had Celestes in your own life? I mean, is that something you draw on, or
Oh,
where does that come from?
sure. I mean, I turned it's really interesting. Like I turned 50 last year and I feel like I've been moving in the direction of sort of okay, so you acquire your education, you work in your profession, and then you start to think of the ways in which you give back to your community as either writer or parent or grandparent or any of those things. And I feel that I wanted to hold space in the novel for people who weren't always just young. I mean, if you open a novel like a traditional mass market paperback or turn on the television, like most of our people, our heroes are younger people. And I love younger people. I mean, I teach them all the time. But I love the way that in like ancient Greek mythology, Norse mythology, African mythology, Asian mythology, that the elders are the ones who are the sages. They have so much. And so I wanted space for them in the novel. And so there's Celeste and Tiresias, her partner, and then there's just, neighbors who have almost exactly what Lillian needs at that moment. Like there's no way she would have survived if the elders weren't there to sort of provide that architecture for her survival. And I think that's really what our elders do. So I think I've had Celeste's, that's my grandmother's name, by the way. I think I've
Okay.
had her, like like older women who have I've learned from, but also I feel like that's the sort of personification of the literature that was there for us to access from our ancestors and teach us, lead us, because
Mhm.
gosh, so much of that comes from the people who have been through what we've been through. So yeah, I think we've all got Celeste's. I hope everyone has a Celeste. She's an MVP in the book.
Um, J Road is a real road. I take it then. I'm not familiar with that geography down in your neck of the woods.
Mhm.
What's it like there? Uh,
Oh gosh, it's so beautiful. I think in Camdenton, it's my husband's from Illinois, so I've spent a lot of time in Illinois, and I think Illinois is lovely, but I've learned flat. And so sometimes we'll drive through it and he's like, "Oh, it's so flat." I'm like, "Oh, that's really nice." Like sometimes you'll see somebody's homestead and they'll be like 50 miles away and you can see all of their land. And that visibility is really nice. I think when you had like 44, I live in St. Louis full time, but when you had west on 44 and then you exit Highway 7, and then the way to take to our old property was Highway 7 to 5 to 7, and then bam, we were Lake Road 713. Highway J was I guess it was about 10 miles before that turnoff, and it was so hilly and so densely forested that you there was it was like the anti-Illinois. Like you couldn't see anything. And if it were like a foggy morning, if you were up and if it was like baling season or something and you were up early, like you could like that and the mist, you couldn't see anything. Like you could barely see your hand in front of you. And so I think the setting is, as a result of that, very mysterious. We
Uh-huh.
would take, occasionally we'd go into town for dinner. And so you could either take Highway 7 to 5, or you could take Highway J to connect to, I guess, town, wherever it was years ago, where we would go to get dinners. And it
Uh,
was just hilly and two-laned, and there'd be a lot of motorcyclists who would drive on Highway J, but I think it always occupied some mythology in my mind because do you remember like vehicles would have the way back and they faced the back of the vehicle?
okay, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So like the kids would all be piled in the way back. And I remember there was a sleepy ride home. It was just at sunset, and my cousin Bridget and I were in the way back, and we were going over and over up and down the hills, and it like the mountains, they just seemed to like rush up to us, like they'd rise up. And like Bridget and I would look at each other like, what was that? There was something mysterious always about Highway J. We'd always beg our parents, like, can we take J Road home? Like, we were always looking for something spooky or something like visual, when you're
Uh-huh.
8, 10 years old. So it is a real road, but the turn off, the property, all of that built around it is totally fiction. And I told that to the publisher. I was like, I just want to let you know that this exists. And they said that, of course, when you announce it as fiction and you put the disclaimer by the ISBN, like this is entirely a work of fiction, like these people aren't real. And Vance Randolph's research is real, but the characters aren't real. But the road is real. And you can take a lovely scenic drive down Highway J if you'd like. There is a pretty cool video on YouTube. If you just type in Camdenton, Missouri, Highway J, some motorcyclist, I guess, had a GoPro and
Oh,
recorded
okay.
an entire 30-minute, I guess, his travails. So it's a beautiful drive if you're ever out that way.
I'll have to check it out for sure. Hey, well, and you describe it so poetically, which makes me want to
Yeah.
remind folks. Um, you're also a poet, and you've got two collections of poetry, two chapbooks, but you, in more recently turned to fiction with a novel last year, and then
Mhm.
this one that has just come out. Um, just, we've only got a few minutes left, but I'm kind of curious about how you find that transition or the play between the types of writing that you've done.
Oh, thanks for asking. I think I was really scared of fiction for a long time because it is like a relationship. Like if you've got 350 pages, like that is you're committed. Poetry is just kind of like it's so dense and brief. I think they're just different. They're different relationships. And I'm really thankful that I'm thankful I get to talk about words all day. People are like, "Oh God, how could you teach?" I'm like, actually, kids are they're really great. They're very like Lillian, they're very courageous, but they allow me the opportunity to read these books with them, right? So we get to read Homer and Shakespeare, and we just finished teaching Percival Everett's James. That was a big hit. So there's a lot of mythology that I get to talk about, and I think teaching gets me in always that mind space to work with words. So I'm grateful
Hmm.
that I have a profession that lets me just keep working at that, just keep practicing. I don't know, maybe I feel like these stories, if I didn't get them out, somehow I'd probably go crazy inside with all the I guess the images that get stuck. But I like
Uh-huh.
both genres a lot, but it is a very different experience. I know you're mostly fiction and nonfiction. Have you ever worked with poetry?
I took a poetry class in college. Wrote some poems in actually, I guess now that I think about it, that was great graduate school in my master's. And the thing I learned was I just don't have the knack for it.
Hmm.
That or at least I didn't develop the knack within a semester. I'll put it that way.
Right.
It was like, yeah, this is not for me.
Mhm.
So I've
Sure.
stayed with prose, although I am very tuned into the rhythms of language, and I'm very alert to that in not only what I read, but also in what I write. And I think that
Absolutely.
prose style, uh, when you're doing it right, shares with poetry that sense of there's a right kind of rhythm to things, and your placement of modifiers and the way that you structure lines really matters, and
Yeah, I've
so
got your book right here. I was
oh,
reading it.
there it is.
Yeah.
Bravo.
I pulled a section on page 61 that I really liked, and it felt almost like journalistic when you were saying Knudsen, Others, and old school sheepmen, immigrant parents who'd herded sheep on the Rocky Mountainsides of Norway. And that whole passage, I don't want to like, I know I'm just throwing this on you, like, here's a section from your book, but I was gonna say like I feel that that feels it's so tight, it feels conversational. So I don't know, you could play with poetry. It's a whole thing where you don't have to play with line breaks and you can just take sections and have it be just a snippet. But I liked your prose too. I can see that you've played and you've paid specific attention to diction and syntax.
Yeah, it really matters, and that's the thing that annoys me about some novels is when you read them, you realize this person was not really listening to how it was going to sound in people's heads,
Mm, mhm.
that any good piece of writing, people should be hearing it in their minds as they read, and it's
Yeah.
going to either sound right or it's going to sound sort of thumpy, and it's not going to work as it should.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, we are within a minute. My little clock is warning me that it is time to call it quits.
Sure thing.
Uh,
Thanks so much for having me. And thanks for the people who I see some people in the chat. Thank you for your messages and for popping on. I know it's a Saturday night. There's so much to be done. So I appreciate anyone reaching out or coming to the Zoom. Means a lot.
well, and thank you for coming, Allison. And everybody, the book is called "The Mysterious Women of J. Road." It's available from April Gloaming Publishing, and there's a link in the comments. So grab your copy now. Good night. Have a
Thanks so
great
much,
day
Steve. Thanks,
tomorrow.
everyone.
And bye bye.
Bye bye.